Hi there, welcome back to Overy Gardens. Now we've had a really lovely start to the year. It's been hot, it's been dry, it's been sunny, but that's actually had a detrimental effect on a lot of plants now. As we progress into the year with this lack of rain and this intense heat, things like roses are actually beginning to struggle. Now, one of the most common problems, and I've actually got an example off this plant here, is black spot, which you can see here on this leaf. Very characteristic traits, the yellowing of the leaves and the black mottled spots on the leaf. Now that's a common problem in periods of extreme stress for the plant. Roses are really hungry, thirsty plants. They do a lot of flowering and they do a lot of growing. So they need a lot of sustenance. And if they go through periods of stress, they are much more susceptible to problems. They get things like mildew, black spot, leaf cutter bees often will go for plants more easily, rose sawfly. So there's a whole host of problems which roses become more susceptible to if they're under duress. Now, there are a few mitigations that you can take to minimize the problems on roses. Now, this rose, unfortunately, has also been eaten by deer, which is why I've netted this one off, and we're trying to nurse it back into health. So there's a few things that we're doing for this rose. We're watering regularly. So you probably, if your rose is showing signs of stress, you want to water it at least once a week, and I mean a big watering. So a whole bucket, a whole watering can. Don't be shy. A lot of people just kind of give it a cursory glance with a bit of water. All that does is just wet the surface. You really need to get the water down into the roots, the water down deep into the soil, so those roots can go further in and become more robust and more resilient. So heavy watering. Also heavy feeding. So there's a few feeding routines you do. I like to feed my roses twice a year with a slow release fertilizer. So once in the spring, once in the autumn. The best all-round fertilizer that I find is fish, bud and bone. So that's a really good fertilizer to apply in kind of March time and then October. That'll just gently release into the soil and feed the plant over a longer period. And in the growing season, so between kind of April and September, any sort of liquid seaweed. Liquid seaweed is the thing to look for. That's the best all-round fertilizer for roses. It has the kind of the greatest number of nutrients across the board, which really helps roses. So a little trick as well, if you are going to feed your roses, don't feed onto bare, dry, barren soil. If you're going to feed your roses, water it first, maybe half a watering can, and then the rest of the watering, put your feed in. If you feed a dry rose, a lot of the water and the feed will just rush off the surface. And also it can harm the plant. So kind of the high concentration of nutrients can actually damage the roots on a dry plant. So just make sure that before you feed your rose, the rose has been pre-watered. And also in that scenario, the rose will actually absorb the nutrients much more readily. So a few tips there with watering and feeding. Another thing to look out for if you're going to buy a rose, it's mainly the roses that have the matte leaves. If a rose has glossier foliage, they're generally much more resilient. And the modern roses that are bred, often you'll find will have glossier foliage, and they are much less susceptible to any sort of problems. So that's a really good tip. If you are going to buy a rose, look out for that. Deadheading as well, make sure you deadhead. If you leave roses, it'll put all its energy into producing seed. Unless you're growing a rose for its hips, make sure you deadhead judiciously. It's really important to keep the rose growing healthily. And if your rose is really, really struggling, it looks almost beyond repair, don't be shy to cut it right back down to the ground at any time during the year. Sometimes, if it's a really bad bout of black spot, your rose will completely defoliate. So it's actually a really good idea to just cut it right back to the ground, feed it, water it, give it all those things I just said, and let it regrow, and it should be absolutely fine. Roses are almost indestructible, so even when they're under stress, they will continue to grow for you. So there's just a few things that we can do as gardeners just to aid them on their way. Another really good tip, if you're growing roses in like kind of open border, is to mulch them. So water them, feed them, mulch them with any sort of compost, a nice organic matter. That locks in the moisture, locks in the nutrients. The compost and the mulch will then break down into the soil and add more feed into the year. So they love food and they love water. So these are the things that are really going to help them on their way. And also, if you're growing in them in open border, try to underplant them. It's a really good idea to densely plant your garden, because if you leave any sort of bare patches of soil, that is a fantastic space for weeds and other things to kind of get into the soil, and also for the soil to dry out. So really underplant your roses. Geraniums are a great plant to have underneath your roses as they spread, and they just protect the soil. So if you water, feed, mulch and underplant, that locks in the moisture, and that means that your rose has the best chance to grow healthily and really thrive in periods of drought. It's this drought that we're having which is a real problem. So roses, although a lot of people kind of worry about them, a few quite simple things to follow and they'll really grow well for you. So as I said, if your roses are struggling, try to adopt a few of those tips.